I had a vague idea of what was about to go down because it wasn't our first rodeo, so to speak.
People were also worried that the more that Taiwan is integrated into a China-centered economy, the more political autonomy we are going to lose.
The initial action we took to storm into the legislature was not peaceful at all. It was an act of violence, although it wasn't directed to any person.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Tomasz Koper, sitting in for Divya Gopalan. 10 years ago, on March 18, 2014, a group of students stormed the Taiwanese legislature to block the passage of a trade agreement with China. They claimed it had not passed through the proper legislative process. Initially lacking a clear strategy, activists ended up occupying the legislature for 3 weeks. These events were dubbed the Sunflower Student Movement and greatly influenced 2 of the nation's following elections. But how accurate is our collective memory of those events? And is the legacy of that movement still relevant in Taiwan 10 years on? To help us answer these questions, we're joined by a guest who was on the ground while the events were unfolding, Jiho, an activist and current city councilor in Keelung, joining us from Nottingham. Thank you for being on the show, Jiho. I want to start with a pretty general question. What was going through your head when you were storming your own country's legislature?
I had a sort of a vague idea of what was about to go down because it wasn't our first rodeo, so to speak. There were a group or a pack of activists have already been active with the series of different movements throughout those years. And what happened on the 18th of March that year seemed to be just one of the many events that activism that took place for us. So, and I thought we might not be able to make it into the chamber, to the House floor, and even if we did, we would be driven out within maybe 20 minutes, because that's what usually happened during those times when we were protesting. So I thought that it wasn't going to be too long. It was going to be over very soon. And little do we know, it became what it became. This protest was about the trade agreement, right? The service and trade agreement. That was on my mind. That was also on many people's mind, that we really were trying to stop something that's going to bring drastic change to the Taiwan economy at the time.
Well, before we move on, we should understand why there was opposition to the cross-strait service trade agreement. We asked National Taiwan University Professor He Ming-xiu for a brief explanation.
I think people don't like this free trade agreement for 2 reasons. Economically, protesters think that this agreement will only benefit Taiwan's big capital because they were intended to go to China. And at the same time, we'll open up many service trade, like for example, a beauty parlor, a social welfare institution, and many of these are small and medium enterprises, and also many of them are family run, so they cannot stand the competition of Chinese counterparts. And on the political front, people were also worried that the more that Taiwan is integrated into a China-centered economy, the more political autonomy we are going to lose. So worries came from 2 fronts, both economic worries and political worries were there.
So, Jiho, the Sunflower Movement did succeed in blocking the passage of that law. So in light of that, do you consider the movement to be a success overall, or do you feel that there were other goals that were not achieved?
I would say, in hindsight, we did. It was a win. It was a success, but not at the time though. We did storm into the legislature, wanting to stop the trade agreement, and it happened. We did have. We not only do we put a stop to the trade agreement, I think the whole movement put a break on the growing narrowing the gap between the Taiwan and China due to the China policy held by the president at the time. So I think we sort of put a break on that. And also with the next two elections, they were all very much affected by the aftermath of the sunflower movement. So I think in that sense, it was a success. It was a collective effort by the everyday common folks of Taiwan to really make a change in this otherwise highly constrained geopolitical predicament that Taiwan has always been in the post-war era.
Well, so many in Taiwan feared that the surface trade agreement would give China too much influence over here. And then a few months later, we saw the umbrella revolution in Hong Kong, which was also in opposition to China getting too much influence in local elections. How much do you feel the umbrella revolution took or drew inspiration from the sunflower movement in Taiwan?
I feel that although what happened in Taiwan and Hong Kong were not synchronized, and it was not a conscious decision from both sides, but unconsciously, I think the activists in Taiwan and Hong Kong were always looking at each other for references, because I think. Through those years of different activism that we took, we have this sense of common destiny, where we're fighting almost the same monster. We are fighting the same fight, and although on different ground with different contexts, but overall it was very similar in what we were dealing with. It was the pressure or the forces of the rise in China, either the people, the tourists, or the economic and other forms of pressures looming onto our own cities and country.
Well, the sunflower student movement attracted attention here in Taiwan, but also around the world. Toby Openshaw is a documentary filmmaker who covered the protests for foreign media. This is his impression of what happened inside Taiwan's legislature.
Inside the hall, during that whole period, things were quite busy, because the students were mostly getting their message out. So firstly, there was this conversations going on about what is this about, what do they want, what are their demands, what will they accept for their demands. Of course, there was also infighting amongst the group there. There's no question about it. Some people wanted to stay longer. Some people wanted to say, okay, we're done, we can get out now. So there was a lot of that kind of conversation going on.
For the full version of our interview with Toby Openshaw, visit our YouTube channel or the TaiwanPlus website. So, Jiho, Toby mentions how there weren't clear demands at the beginning of the occupation. So what did it take for members of that group to work those out eventually?
I think we were quite clear on what we wanted initially, but we just couldn't communicate with everyone about what was the goal of the movement, because at first it was a surprise attack from our side. Like, we were surprising the legislature by storming in. They didn't expect us to really do it, and so element of surprise means that you can't really talk about it before it happened. So when people follow the crowd and storming into the legislature slowly, of course it was chaotic at first, because people are just it was dark, there was no electricity or water, and so it took about a couple of hours before everyone had any idea of the whole picture. But I think by a few hours into the movement, I think people had a pretty good idea of the demand and what we really want. Just that probably from the journalist point of view, there was no a clear or like a face of the movement or a spokesperson. We haven't had that. So they were talking to many, and different people had different ideas of what it was until a few hours later, when the leaders or the initiators finally have time to come down and talk about it to the journalists.
Well, I want to talk about the leadership later in the program, but you mentioned journalists and media. How do you feel the movement, the events were portrayed in the media in Taiwan and elsewhere in the world at the time?
Taiwan media has this tradition of reporting student movements in a positive light at first. It's so at first it wasn't bad. I mean, the media were quite helpful in spreading the message out. But I think just like many of the activists that still haven't grasped the idea of what's going on, the media too was confused at first. And I think after a few days in, it's quite difficult on their part, because the public still want to see what's going on with the activists and the legislature. But the media has run out of things to say, because they have pretty much reported everything they knew. So they started to dig into really little details here and there, and that became sort of trivial, but that's sort of the nature of media of 24-hour news. You just run out of things to say.
Right. Well, I want to bring in one more voice into our conversation. We asked Indigenous activist Savungaz Valincinan, who was also part of the occupation, about her thoughts on reaching a consensus.
社会运动本身也是一个社会教育的过程，我们不能把民众当成操作对象的这件事情，我想是一个很多人在318运动之后都会特别注意的事情。就很简单啊，这个决策机制是有资格限制的就是每一个，因为318运动是这样，就是每一个空间都长出各自的运作团体嘛。不管是在一场1楼或是2楼，或者是说所谓的8巷啊，然后青岛东路啊、济南路啊之类的。可是他们在做决策的时候，其实这个决策不是对群众取得共识，是少数的头人去在小房间里面开会决定的。就会看见说，在这一场大型的运动当中，其实那个公民参与的那个框架是有限的。
So Jiho, can you tell us a bit more about this disunity in the movement among the different groups?
So it's not like we are an army. There is no discipline. There is no a list of commands. So of course it's people are going to form their spontaneous groups. So in that sense, it was quite difficult to make a consensus, to reach a consensus among the activists or leaders, and not to mention the masses, right? It's almost impossible to have a convention or to have a vote for everyone involved, right? Because the area is just so vast, and there are different corners of people, and people convene and gather in different places. So yeah, of course, you're bound to get into that situation where one group is not agreeing with the other, and I think I also mentioned there's a series of movements that was taking place in those years. 2014, I think, like 5 or even 6 years prior to the white sunflower movement, there was the white wild strawberry movement. And so actually a lot of seasoned activists have had experiences, some very bad experiences in trying to reach consensus with a large, hundreds of people at once. So I think logistically and pragmatically, it was very difficult to make any decision with the participation of everyone. So I think that sort of resulted in smaller decision makings and a disunity among the different factions within the movement.
Disunity kind of came to prominence when it came to what happened a few days after the storming of the legislative yuan, when the executive yuan was then sort of became the next point of interest for the activists. But not everyone was on board. Is that right?
Yeah, not everyone was on board. That's for sure. I think at first on the 18th, the first group of people stormed into the legislature, and it became sort of stagnated because there are occupiers occupying the legislatures, but we didn't really occupy the whole legislature. The compound has doors and different gates, and they were still guarded by the legislative police. So the police were still there. So at one point it was confusing whether we have really occupied the legislature or not, because we're still listening to the police orders on who can get into it and who cannot. So it was a very peculiar situation there. So some of the initial activists were upset with what happened in the legislature. It became a political stage for some, and we didn't really feel that it could move to push the movement forward. So some of us were start to think of other options to maybe take other to top ourselves, basically to do something else. So and the discussion began with the other possible target, other possible location for occupation, new occupation. So and executive yuan came up as one of the options, which is the most dangerous. And so I think some of us, especially those of us who are more seasoned and had more experiences, kept on pushing for going to less significant institutions like 监察院 or 考试院, examination yuan or something like that. That's less guarded, with especially with symbolically constitutional branch of government. So we thought, those are less harmful and less risky targets. But I think overwhelmingly everyone would wanted to really hit a highly sensitive target so that the government will listen to our demands. That's why eventually the executive yuan happened. But when it first happened, the activists in the legislature chambers were not. Of course, they were aware that we had meetings after meetings about the actions we were taking, but initially it was not reported by the media with a positive light. So the people in the legislature denied having any knowledge of it, and it wasn't later, the student leaders admitted that yes, we were all in this together.
Well, you called the executive yuan a dangerous target. What was the sort of tolerance for violence that the people who were there were willing to accept? How much clashes they were up for?
Yeah, well, the debate was this. So it was a few days in the legislature, and the activists started to pose themselves as we posted ourselves as this peaceful and simple and idealistic students, which we were. But the the initial action we took to storm into the legislature was not peaceful at all. It was an act of violence, although it wasn't directed to any person. It was more directly to the building, the institution. But nonetheless, it was not a peaceful action. So when we start to discuss the possibility of another raid, and especially on executive yuan, the disagreement was that it's not peaceful. It's not the peaceful action. It's nothing like the legislature, and the opposition was that opposing argument was that. None of this is peaceful. Of course, we're trying to not direct this to any person in particular, especially the police guarding these places. But it's still violence nonetheless. It was a very risky target, because it really was where all the ministries were located, right? So you have sensitive government documents, and just the possibility that the government might not be able to go to work the next day. That really put a pressure on the government to violently suppress the activists. And so there was, a lot of argument within the groups whether we should really do it or not. And eventually, when it happened, when it finally took place, when the raid finally took place, some of the activists tried to get people out of that situation. But like I said, activists are not. It's not an army. You can't just control everyone. You can't just order people to come in and go. It doesn't work like that. So I think it's very lucky for us that very few people actually got seriously injured during that night on 24th.
Well, you mentioned people, the students being idealists, and I'm glad you did, because a decade ago, Taiwan's youth had a less than favorable image among older generations. They were thought of as spoiled and entitled, a situation not that different from today's intergenerational discords. Filmmaker Toby Openshaw gives us his take on how the youth of the time stood up for what they believed in.
10 years ago, the youth of Taiwan was known as the strawberries because they would, if you squeeze them, they bruise very easily. And somehow this event brought the young people together in a way that's never been done before in Taiwan. And I saw students being really, really brave because they had something that they believed in and they were willing to stand up for it. So when the police approached, with their batons and everything, those kids would link arms and sit in the street, I get choked up every time I talk about it, because it's really beautiful to see. And so they kept the moral high ground, and they were successful. They were largely successful. Today, many people say, the sunflower movement, it's all gone. Where are they now? It wasn't successful or whatever. But no, it really was. And it caused a whole groundswell of people recognizing and realizing that they have a role to play in the politics in this country and that there are things that are worth fighting for. To this day, I feel that the youth of Taiwan have really shown a strength that nobody knew they had and that they will carry into the future. Looking at what might be coming down the pike here in Taiwan, I really feel that the people of Taiwan will surprise the world when their backs are against the wall.
Again, for the full version of our interview with Toby Openshaw, visit our YouTube channel or the TaiwanPlus website. So, Jiho, we're running out of time for this program, but I have one more question for you. Toby suggests that Taiwanese people will surprise the world when their backs are against the wall. And, well, with the threat of China looming large, do you think that the youth of Taiwan would stand up and resist if push came to shove?
Yeah, of course. I think it's that generation of sunflowers were called the wild strawberries, a while back, and it was because there was no chance to test the resilience of that generation of Taiwan youth. And I think, if situation forces us to do something, of course, I think the ideals of the youth and the need or the motivation to seek freedom is ever more stronger as generations passes on, because Taiwan is just getting freer and freer, and people are opening up to the world like never before. So of course people are going to defend the country if necessary.
Well, on that positive note, we have to end today's show. Thank you very much to my guest, Zhang Zhihao, activist and city councilor in Keelung, joining us from Nottingham. And for our viewers everywhere, it's been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you would like to add to the dialogue, join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.